The former CEO of the Walt Disney Company, often harangued and harassed by Bob Iger in terms of declaring him a failure, well, he spoke out finally. Bob Chapek giving his first thoughts in an interview since being fired so long ago. But he did not say much. And why was not much said? Because it turns out Bob Chapek can't say what's on his mind just yet. Hello folks, welcome back to the Pro Channel. It is, as always, a true honor to have you here. You are the gigawatts that drive everything, and the journalists, the drive-bys, they just stop by to find out what the headlines will be tomorrow, and they take notes. But you all, the excellent audience that we have, you don't need notes because you are here with the highest IQ on the web, photographic memory guaranteed. And today we are talking about Bob Chapek, who has a photographic memory when it comes to what happened at the Disney Company. It's just a shame he can't talk about it. And for folks out there who were excited, thinking that now that Bob Chapek, the lesser Bob, according to Iger, now that he was able to finally speak out, maybe he would speak out about what had happened, what had gone wrong, what's going on. But they were left disappointed. Not us, though. Not here on this channel, because we knew that Bob Chapek is still under constraint by the Disney Company. Finally, Bob Chapek has spoken out, and he spoke out on CNBC with Alex Sherman about ESPN. Now, folks, we don't have time to play the conversation in its entirety, the interview in its entirety, but we do recommend that you go check it out on CNBC. But I wanted to bring up something very interesting, at least in my estimation, once again, and that is that many were hoping that Bob Chapek would speak out about his experience at Disney, about whether or not he had been wronged, whether he agreed with Bob Iger, etc. And I have attempted to temper that. And the reason is, and this is where things get a little unfair. In fact, a whole lot of unfair, until you realize that Bob Chapek was paid a ton of money. So, you know, there is that. Whereas Bob Iger is able to say anything and everything he wants, essentially, just about Bob Chapek. Bob Chapek is under an NDA. He is not allowed to say anything negative about Bob Iger as CEO. And so Bob Chapek, even to do an interview, I'm assuming, and Jonas, you correct me if I'm wrong, panel, you correct me, I think probably a precondition for this had to be that Bob Chapek would not be asked any questions that could even put him in a position where he would have to be critical of Disney. And I think that's why he's not doing interviews hardly at all, is because he's stuck. Now, he made a lot of money. He's got $20 million plus to sit on his duff, but he can't talk. And I'll tell you guys, you probably all know I like to do some talking. I can't think of many worse things than the inability to say what really happened to me. And Bob Chapek's there.
Not only are you correct, but also I'm just sitting here wondering, when is that NDA going to expire? Because I really can't wait to see what he has to say about Disney and Bob Iger and stuff.
25 years to life.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, if it's criminal activity, he's not bound by an NDA. So the thing that I see that's interesting here is he did say some things that you would think are not necessarily favorable to Bob Iger's position. I don't think that this made ESPN look better. There's a lot about it that says that they were considering a lot of options with ESPN. I wouldn't say that he was the perfect representative for ESPN, but he is probably the best person to make that case without being, you know, Mr. Charming in a sweater. He's Mr. Realistic and money-centered in a sweater. Or a hoodie, I guess that is. Is he wearing a hoodie right there? What is that?
Well, it's like a
fleece.
It's a members only jacket.
Yeah, that's right. Available right now in the Pro Store.
He was financially realistic, which is something that, generally speaking, Bob Iger is not. And then the Jimmy Pitaro section made me lose faith that ESPN is going to continue.
Well, okay, so just briefly, Jonas, I was shocked at how poorly Pitaro performed. Were you shocked?
Yes, it made me 100% sure he is not getting that CEO job. He does not belong in a place where he does interviews for the company. And it makes me prefer Chapek, despite the fact that Chapek always looks like he's being victimized.
Well, I got to say, I thought Pitaro, it made me question how in the world is this man running something like ESPN? was mind-boggling. But anyway,
maybe they thought it was a different guy named Jimmy Pitaro, and it was too late in the process. Chapek said that he essentially whittled down the entire market for ESPN, saying that 1/3 of all cable subscribers actually watch ESPN, and the mid-tier people, when they see the price point, they're essentially going to be out. And so this $30 to $50 a month that they're going to be asking for whatever this ESPN streaming service is, or either one of them, because they're talking about at least two at this point on top of ESPN Plus, that it's essentially going to be 1/3 of the cable market at this point, which is kind of terrifying. And you hope that from a financial standpoint, they can figure out how to make that work. They also made it very clear that ESPN, they didn't intend to say this, but ESPN stands apart from Disney in such a distinct way that classic Disney synergy thing that they like to talk about, that flywheel, does not apply to ESPN in any way. It might as well be its own business, whether or not it actually is its own business.
Doesn't ESPN basically, and my information might be a little old, but doesn't ESPN prop up cable industry basically?
Entirely, yeah.
Entirely. Yep. And here's how, because when individual cable companies negotiate the fees to the cable companies, they're all different. They could be 25 cents per user, 50 cents per user, or $1 per user. But as people who understand how this works, for decades, ESPN has turned to these cable companies, and like the mafia, negotiated a high fee. $4, $5 per customer goes to ESPN. Whether you watch ESPN or not, you as the cable company, customer in the United States, traditionally has paid these fees. And that's why 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you heard a thing in the United States, a la carte cable billing, and that almost went to the Senate. But ESPN represents the old system, and I don't understand how any of this can work the way that Jonas described it.
Right. I'll say this. So Valiant Renegade and I, we watched the 24-minute documentary as soon as it came out, 6 a.m., and we just reacted to the whole thing. It took us about an hour to break down everything. Man. And then we watched separately, we watched the Bob Chapek interview, which is about 20 minutes, and then the Jimmy Pitaro interview after it. So about about an hour or so of content here. With Pitaro, he ended up calling ESPN a niche product. Indicates to me does not understand. If I was a shareholder, I would be furious at that idea. He did not do a good job of articulating why they need partners. Alex Sherman asked him, what would a partner benefit be? Because Chapek said, well, if they were looking for cash, they might enter into a partner agreement because they have to pay for Hulu. Bob Iger would never want them to indicate they're having a cash problem in any way, of course. But Pitaro said that for a partner, it would be kind of like that Verizon deal that Disney Plus and Verizon had, where it reduces churn. That's a very poor answer. So Sherman confronted him with a very specific question. And it kind of goes to the point that you're making here, Matt. ESPN, being a cable channel or a series of cable channels, was able to double dip. So they were able to be a cable provider. Sorry, not a cable provider, a cable channel that received money from the cable operators, and also advertising. And so they had a much bigger war chest. As sports were huge, they had this great war chest to bid against NFL and NBA or NCAA or whatever. And now that cable is fading, they have to somehow replicate that same business model, but with streaming. At the same time that they are trying to figure out how to convince shareholders that doing yet another streaming service, no, guys, it's going to work this time. So he asked Jimmy Pitaro, how is this going to work? And Pitaro's answer was, through the power of the Walt Disney Company.
I think the reason why that's all very fascinating. I find that fascinating. I think a lot of people in our audience, they're interested in sports too. And the fact that ESPN essentially, I think the reason why they say niche is because quite frankly, sports are very accessible right now. You have cable, or you're at a bar and you can see the game really without paying. It's not really behind a paywall. And this last NFL season, you saw playoff games, AFC playoff games, Kansas City, Baltimore. They're on Peacock. They force an entire city, an entire country of fans to go, oh my God, the game's not on NBC. It's not on my regular networks or things that I'm used to. And then they have to go, they have to get all their information. They have to sign up for something that they don't want. That will only accelerate. They say it's niche, it's too accessible. They have a plan to take all these sports and put them behind paywalls where every game that's important to you, and an American sports fan feels like the bigger the game, the bigger the playoff game, the Super Bowl game, whatever it is, whatever sport, that's free. That's easily found. I don't have to search for it. Niche things you have to search for. So I think in there, it's a Freudian slip.
So that's what they're trying to. That's what they're trying to do, and that's what they're trying to address. And Chapek talked about that as well. I will say one more thing that Sherman brought up that I think is the sleeping giants here are, of course, the Microsofts, the Apple, and then, you know, if someone outside of the tech industry, okay. But Amazon got more signups for Prime in a single hour than they have ever gotten when they announced that Thursday Night Football would be on Prime. And that is, I'm sure that is more than worth the cost for Amazon. So these companies that are 5 to 10 times the size of the Walt Disney Company, if they just say, okay, yeah, we'll float you a check for whatever you want, NFL, we'll take the whole thing. I think that's the doom of somebody like ESPN if these bigger companies get engaged. That's honestly where I thought the partner agreement would go if they were talking about doing an equity stake with someone like Amazon as opposed to like an NFL or NBA or something like that. So
let me interject here that I just want people to understand that tomorrow morning here on the Pro Channel, we're going to talk about this major development in the Disney board vote. And just to specify why this is such a big deal, ISS has a dramatic impact on the institutions, right? So when we talk about the major institutions, we've often talked about how they're backing Bob Iger. ISS holds significant sway with them. They also tend to not vote until the very last moment because they have officials designated to do that for them, whose job it is to do this. So it actually could move the needle. Now, more importantly, perhaps, while Nelson Peltz, I still think is likely to lose, for ISS to get on board now, I think this may indicate that Peltz sticks around for another year rather than cashing it out and making tons of money. I think he might stick around, and I think you're talking about 4 board seats and significant impact on who's going to be the successor of the Disney company. And hey, we will happily cover all of that. And folks, we are at the end. Boy, what a good time we have had today. Hope you had a good time too. And if you did, before you leave, before you exit, on the way out, consider clicking the like button, share, subscribe, and click it. Stick it to the algorithms. It's the notification bell. Drop a comment down below and let us know. Did you learn something today? Was this an enlightening elucidation of how things actually work behind the scenes? Did this help you understand Hollywood and Disney and the Bobs just a little better? We would love to hear back from you. We read them. We really do care. Folks, the Pro Show is live Tuesdays at noon Eastern, and this week we have 2 live streams, not 1. Tuesday at noon Eastern and also Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Why 2? Well, because the news is flying fast and furious. We're not talking about cars. We're talking about the Disney ballot vote for the Disney board coming up very soon. It is a race to capture all the news surrounding it, a battle for the culture of America, as so many big players want to decide what kind of entertainment makes it to your kids. Folks, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep, you know the line, having fun.